in what seemed like the fastest but also craziest winter offseason in West Virginia football history. Wow, we're already at it. Spring practice time, baby, for the 2025 West Virginia football season. I'm Carson Fox for Fox on West Virginia Mountaineer Sports, and that's right. So starting this Tuesday, West Virginia will take to the field for 5 weeks of practice, culminating with the Gold and Blue Spring Showcase. Not a spring game, a spring showcase. Ooh. Yeah, so what am I expecting? I'll give you some thoughts on what I feel like we as West Virginia fans can, hope for, look for, follow as spring practice goes around. And if you've listened to some of the podcasts, Three Guys Before the Game with Rich Rodriguez about 4 or 5 weeks ago. He also had a press conference with Zach Alley last week, right before, leading up to the kickoff of spring practice, just to kind of preview it a little bit. You kind of got an idea of what he's looking at. Actually, hearing the press conference this past week while I was kind of putting together my notes in preparation for this show, I was thinking it was going to be something along the lines of like maybe 60-40 skill development and evaluation versus playbook, everything install, both offensively and defensively. And I got to say, after listening to that press conference, I think it's even going to be more. It's going to be more along the lines of, I think, like 75-25 skill development, player evaluation, and then, throw in some plays here and there, get the very basics of the playbook together. But really, I think this is going to be like a Full Metal Jacket, like military grueling weeding out process. Like, Rich Rodriguez and staff are just looking for private piles all over this roster because they don't know what to make of it. He said he watched some of the games highlights, if you want to call it, some of those losses highlights from the 2024 season in Texas Tech, most notably made him throw up. So they are going to put everybody on the line. Nobody's coming into this with any sort of not loyalty isn't the right word, but it's like everything that you've proved up to this point in time does not matter. Which, for some of the upperclassmen who have really worked their tails off in this program, the ones who have decided to stick around, you got to prove it all over again. Now, I know that's very few. So this is a whole new shift. This is honestly what I kind of wished that would have happened, 6 years ago with Neil Brown, that there was so much dead wood on the Dana Holgorsen what left for dead roster of 2019. Yes, I know the great academic cheating scandal of 2019, apparently, allegedly with Marcus Sims and forget his first name, Robinson, the safety. So your two best players going into the 2019 season, you missed out on. But so from there on out, I feel as if Neil Brown needed to get some of those bad eggs out of the basket, off the roster. He talked about this in later years, and I don't think it's necessarily to give a parallel for this season that West Virginia Rich Rodriguez is looking for guys with bad attitude or necessarily haven't bought into the program. I think those players would have already left. I think after the way the 2024 season ended with a first edition of the transfer portal opening up, I think any of those guys, we didn't have the transfer portal in 2019 the way we know it is today. So I think those guys would have kind of already left. And we saw a vast number of departures already from this roster leave earlier this offseason. So now it's a bulk of guys who want to prove it, who are either were early in their tenure under head coach Neil Brown and now are still in that kind of, coming out of a red shirting, want to prove it, have been in the strength and conditioning, nutrition program already for a year, so they want to go and have their best shot. And then there are also some guys who are like, man, chomping at the bit for that starting opportunity and quality reps. I'm thinking Jaheim White without C.J. Donaldson there. I'm thinking Rodney Gallagher with a wide open wide receiver room. I'm thinking Nico Marchiol with the starting quarterback position. Finally, there opened up for him. It's still in competition, but for his to be had for this season and not sitting behind a fifth-year senior in Garrett Green to get that opportunity. So this is going to be, and West Virginia added over 30 in the transfer port between transfers and JUCO players, that there are a whole bunch of players who have been promised a shot as well. So everybody is starving for those reps, for those starting positions. So what I think, and this is really what I want to watch. When I looked at the total online roster, West Virginia is at 109. So including scholarship players returning from 2024, plus West Virginia's 2025 high school signees, JUCO signees, and transfer portal additions, I have West Virginia currently at 106 players. So the math kind of adds up when you consider West Virginia has 24 walk-ons from the 2024 teams still on the roster, yet 18 of its high school and JUCO recruits have yet to officially start at West Virginia University. So ultimately, I know I throw out a lot of numbers there for you to try and follow. When April 6th comes, there will be another. So get ready. Hold on to your butts, as Samuel L. Jackson would say from Jurassic Park. There will be another mass exodus of players from this roster, either by way of the staff telling guys they're out, having to make those hard cuts, I think, as Rich Rodriguez said at his press conference this past week, or players leaving of their own accord, just saying, hey, look, you know what, either I'm not fitting in, I don't fit into this system, or I can't cut it, that I'm not going to, make it as part of this team, I'm going to leave elsewhere. So who should be worried? I would say going into the spring practice, who does this matter to the most? It's those 24 walk-ons, especially from that 24 team who are still working out, still in the eating free meals, or I don't know how they work that out with the nutrition program. If they're not on scholarship, do they pay for their own meals out of the football cafeteria and other places? I don't know, but I'm talking about guys like in the running backs room, Clay Ash, who we saw in the spring game prominently featured last year. Judah Price, an in-state player who made his mark in the state title game a few years ago for Independence. Also, Caden Beiser's little brother Jackson. So it's these guys who are names that or a couple of the quarterbacks, Scott Keene, Abe Fenwick, who are, way down on the depth chart. These guys that Neil Brown would have liked to consider as part of his, what he called development program, or, just keeping walk-ons to use as scout team, to use in practice. So it's those guys that are now, with the way that the new roster limits in NCAA is coming because of the House settlement coming down at the beginning of April, West Virginia doesn't have this luxury of having players on its roster who are not receiving scholarships and NIL contributions. So they can't have them on the roster as much as you'd like to have them. That's why the roster limit is higher. Previously 85 scholarships, now they're going to a 105. But is West Virginia going to pay in scholarship and NIL money to a Judah Price if he's 6th, 7th on the roster at running back? No. You could have done that previously, but you can't anymore. So it's players like that who are going to be first to get the axe unless they come out there and have an incredible camp. And in some cases, I call this camp, spring camp, and in some cases, players at that same position on the roster either don't work hard, loaf. That's what my old football coach called it, loaf. Or, they want to explore, they're disgruntled, they're, frustrated, they mess up, this, that, and the other. Like, everybody, unfortunately, is going to be walking around, with tight butt cheeks out there. Everybody's going to just be, like, on edge, nervous to make a mistake, which can bring out the best in players, which is great, but it's not going to be so laissez-faire like a Neil Brown led spring camp of last year when he said that he felt so good at the starters all across the board, offensively and defensively, that they could do some things creatively with their spring camp. It's not going to be that way. And also, speaking of Neil Brown recruited players, any of the former Neil Brown recruited players, I don't care, seniors through freshmen, are I feel like first on the chopping block. Like I look into this defensive backfield, West Virginia has quite a few guys who redshirted this past year, and with what might have been the worst West Virginia secondary, I feel like since 2012 when Pat Miller was back there for at cornerback, if you couldn't see the field then, are you good enough to play at this level, even practice at this level? So that's what I'm saying. There are a few or guys who, again, if you're in your third, fourth year and you have yet to see the field at this point in time, it's easier to shed that player to try and find. With you have this opening with the transfer portal, I call them free agency period number 1, free agency period number 2 after spring camp concludes. So then anybody who loafs that, oh man, Rich Rodriguez and this coaching staff are going to smell that out quickly. So that's why I said I feel like the guys who are in the high school, who are the high school recruited players who are not going to be showing up till this summer. It's really the early enrollees who I feel like who don't get as much of the benefit of the doubt because, man, they're going to have to go through this grueling spring practice and battle, whereas the high school players aren't. They're going to get to show up in the summer. Yeah, they'll go through a grueling fall camp and might go through that same kind of a process, but I really want to see what happens from a roster management perspective whenever the spring game's over. Spring showcase is over. What will be that number? What will be that number of cuts that come down? And then what is West Virginia looking to add? So that's what I mean by that. So within that, I think there are some positives and negatives. Even talking about if this is going to be Oklahoma drill to see who's toughest, to see who's fastest, to see who can hit the hardest, all of that. If you're really just trying to evaluate players' ability, I think this is going to hold back or delay some of that offensive and defensive install, which you're going to have to wait really until the summer, in fall camp to be able to do. Now, do I think Neil Brown and Rich Rodriguez's offensive systems are night and day apart? No. I think there are a lot of same concepts. I mean, everybody, it seems like in today's world of college football, runs some sort of RPO game. And that's what I think Rich Rodriguez's game has evolved from the mid-2000s to today to look very similar, but still very run-heavy, which is what West Virginia has been accustomed to these last several years under Neil Brown. So from that perspective, the calls, the alignments, the pre-snap motion, all going to be different. So it's going to be a lot on Nico Marchiol, a lot on Jalen Henderson, a lot on Max Brown, to be able to take in a lot of information over this spring, over this summer, and then put it into practice. So I just, if you get so focused on the, I think that West Virginia right now has some semblance already of a first string or a second string, and there's open competition. But let's walk through it just to go through, position group by position group, and we can kind of talk about it, of what to look for. So starting it off with the quarterbacks, it really comes down to those two players, in my opinion, Jalen Henderson and Nico Marchiol. Doing a little more research on Jalen Henderson since he transferred, I'm very intrigued by him. Go back and watch the 2023 game between Jaden Daniels-led LSU versus Texas A&M, and A&M was on the road, and they were beating LSU 24-21 in the fourth quarter. Henderson, if he wouldn't have had a drop from, I think it was a fullback or a tight end, would have led a scoring drive on Texas A&M's first possession in the first half, played up by multiple scores, but it was a one-score game from, like I said, 3/4 of the game until 1 interception that was just thrown a little bit over the top of a receiver. The receiver didn't make as great of an effort, that Henderson just kind of floated. LSU took possession and controlled the game from there. So I liked what I saw from Jalen Henderson in that game. I think he's got enough mobility, and I think he's got enough of an arm. He has a little bit low of a sidearm motion to his throws, pushes the ball a little bit more than just, I feel like, ripping it, but still strong, gets it out quick, and he's athletic. So I think he will bring great competition with Nico Marchiol. The thing I'll say about Henderson that I feel like nobody's talked about is he's missed 2 complete years of football due to redshirting and then an injury. So he's played he got late into the game at Fresno State, comes along to Texas A&M, doesn't get his opportunity really until late 2023, then gets injured in the bowl game and is out for all of 2024. So he hasn't played, I feel like, right around 1 full season of college football in 4 years. So that's where I'm like, okay, people like, I think it was Drew Schiffino who tweeted out there like Jalen Henderson guaranteed will be the day 1 starter in August. I don't know how you can say that. I don't know what he's proved between Fresno State and Texas A&M that you can say automatically he's going to be the starter. When I hear stories of Rich Rodriguez talking about Tyler Huff this past year, running a 4.7, didn't know that he could run based upon what he saw out of practice, and then he gets into a game against Louisville week 2, and man, he's running like his head's on fire. Like, that's what Nico Marchiol can do. Is he a player who could play predominantly from the pocket? Yes, as comparatively to Garrett Green, but you've seen him run. We all have. He has the ability. Is he a Garrett Green kind of runner? No. And that I don't know if that's like, if Rich Rodriguez and staff could achieve what Jacksonville State did this past year with a 4.7 smaller runner in Tyler Huff, who's not the passer Nico Marchiol is, you can't tell me that Nico Marchiol can't fit this system. I just don't buy that. Now, is Henderson a better runner of what I've seen comparatively between some of those highlights from Henderson at previous schools and what I've seen of Marchiol? I'd give the edge to Henderson right now. Yeah. But let's see what they can do out on the field. So I think this is just going to be the start of a long journey, 5 weeks of gotta give it their all athletically, not give up, work hard, figure out this new receiving core. Marchiol has some of his old receivers back, but I don't think Jeff Weimer, the Idaho State transfer, is here for spring practice. You will have Cam Vaughn, which is nice. You will have Rodney Gallagher back. I think Jaden Bray is finally healthy. Didn't barely see him except for, I think, 1 game in 2024. So Marchiol has a little bit of familiarity with some of these guys, which should give him, theoretically the edge there. So it's just going to be the first of a long battle between the two. What I just will say is, and I guess I'll say this in February, so mark me down, is isn't really anything I feel like that will put a bad taste in the mouths of fans who, if you want to extend that kind of grace to the players who have been loyal, who have wanted to stay with the program through this NIL era, bide their time, still compete, dedicate themselves to the program, and then you come in, new head coach, find a new quarterback out of the transfer portal, and that quarterback doesn't work out, man, that, like, if we're going to criticize Neil Brown for everything that happened through the Austin Kendall, the Jarrett Deggy era, then that same type of criticism has to be applied to Rich Rodriguez. When you have a Nico Marchiol out there who was a former 4-star quarterback who bided his time under Garrett Green, developed, he's not some 18-year-old kid anymore. He's done everything that he's been asked to as part of this program and within the community. So I think he'll get his fair shot. I think he's up for the challenge, and I just hope at the end of the day he gets a fair shake. So we'll see what happens. Either way, it's not like I'm trying to say out here, I'm already going to be critical if Jalen Henderson gets the nod over Nico Marchiol. No, that's not. I'm just saying I will be watching and I'm going to report it, or critique it fairly either way. And I feel like Nico Marchiol, because of what he's put in for years now, gets a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt to start off. I think that's only fair in today's world of the transfer portal and NIL. So let's move on down to the running backs. I know quarterback is the most, the hot topic, going to be, I feel like, a make or break thing of whether this team is, above 6 wins or below 6 wins as quarterback play. For this year. So at the running backs room, the number one thing we have to talk about, I think, to start off, is the effect of Chad Scott as running backs coach departure on this program group. Namely, Jaheim White to start off. He did tweet something, I think, like earlier this week saying got to work harder out there. So it's great. If he's bought into this Rich Rodriguez system, program, it's very easy to think, I think natural to think as a fan, that Jaheim White is primed for an over 1,000-yard season, because he was already on that as a true freshman with the number of carries that he's going to get with C.J. Donaldson gone and what Rich Rodriguez-led teams have been able to do at the running back position, from what he did at West Virginia, Michigan, Arizona State, now Jacksonville State. And I'm glad that there wasn't an initial, I'm out the door, sayonara, the same thing as Chad Scott. Now, again, I think Jaheim's probably in the same boat as many of these other players, willing to give it a shot because he has options. He has options in the transfer portal, whether we like it or not. I think Pro Football Focus ranked him as the 10th best returning running back in college football for FBS for next season. So while I don't think he would start, maybe even split carries at Texas, but if he wanted to go elsewhere. But I don't understand the whole I'm so attached to a coach that I'm going to follow them wherever they go types of thing. If you saw, that didn't happen with Zach Alley. Nobody from Oklahoma. Zach Alley led Oklahoma from this past season, came with him to Morgantown. So that's what I'm just not buying, is that there's this just such loyalty to the coach rather than there is to the program. So a guy like Tomas Remak, I don't get that move. Same with Kyle Altuner and Lucas Austin. I can understand they were guys who were recruited first and foremost by I'm already forgetting his name, the offensive previous Matt Moore, going to Virginia Tech. Because you haven't been, you were only here a year, you were recruited by that coach, you redshirted, you really didn't get the full taste. You really didn't get to understand West Virginia, Morgantown, all of that. But a guy like Tomas Remak, who was going to come in and be that linchpin on the offensive line, I just don't get that move into Virginia Tech, West Virginia's second biggest rival. Just weird move. So I'm glad to see Jaheim sticking around. I think great competition that he'll have with L.J. Turner, who's coming up from the Division II level wanting to prove himself. Ty Edwards is the heir apparent to C.J. Donaldson. So I think this is really make it or break it time for Dior Hubbard and Trayvon Dunbar. Which of those two are really going to slot into that fourth string running back role? Because if Clay Ash and Judah Price, like I said, are going to give everything they possibly can to try and earn a roster spot, they can't keep them all. So if you're going to keep 4, which couldn't imagine West Virginia keeping fewer than 4, does it come down to one spot between Hubbard and Dunbar? Might be both at the end of the day, but they were both recruited out of the same recruiting class, same years of eligibility, same, very similar skill sets, although I know that Dunbar's a little bit heavier. A little bit more of a power back, but West Virginia, this coaching staff doesn't know them from David, so they got to go out there and prove it. So a lot of running backs on that position. So, and now moving up to wide receivers, will 3 or 4 leaders emerge? That's really, contrasting the old West Virginia offenses under Rich Rodriguez. You really only need about 3 wide receivers to perform. Because of how run heavy this offense is. And if I feel really comfortable in Cam Vaughn being West Virginia's 1, I feel really comfortable in Rodney Gallagher, at least right now, being West Virginia's 2. So who is that 3? Like I said, with Jeff Weimer not being out there. I think this is a make it or break it time for Jaden Bray and Jarrell Williams. Jarrell Williams coming into his 4th season with the program. If he can't play, if he can't break it, I feel like into maybe like the top 6, top 7, then what is the point of Jarrell Williams being on this roster? Same with Jaden Bray. I know he was supposed to be West Virginia's like number 2 wide receiver alongside Hudson Clement this past year, but Jaden Bray, don't know what happened. After that Penn State game when he caused that fumble, we never heard from Jaden Bray again. So I thought it was going to be one of those like mysterious injuries like we're having with Jaden Stone on the basketball court, that then the guy disappears to the transfer portal, one hit, wonder, and you're out and you never see him, kind of a thing. So who is that 3rd guy? Will a 3rd and maybe 4th guy emerge onto this roster? Oren Singleton was their first wide receiver that they brought over. Cyrus Trow, a Jared Bowie from Jacksonville State. Who's going to be that 3rd pass catcher in this offense? Because everybody else who might be considered played at either the G6 or FCS level this past year or really didn't play in 2024. So that's what I'm watching for. At tight ends, I really feel like this is the most versatile room maybe on the entire roster. 6 really different guys. My opinion, though, Rodriguez wants blockers over receivers. I can't think of anyone, through that era who significantly contributed as a tight end in Rich Rodriguez's systems. Now, I know I've looked back at some of the stats. Michigan notably, did a little bit here and there with his tight ends, but very little. Definitely less than what Cole Taylor experienced these past couple of years in Neil Brown's systems, even Trayvon Wesco going back to 2018 under Dana Holgerson. So, I'm looking at guys like Greg Genross. Does he actually have a role within this offense, or will he go portaling? If he was supposed to be more of a receiving tight end than a blocking tight end, will Jackson Aquardi actually fit the mold? He's an early enrollee, high school recruit, and we didn't hear of Noah Bram at all in 2024. Jack Samarco, true freshman, came onto the scene in that tight end room, and when Cole Taylor was out or West Virginia wanted to go, heavier with Traylon Davis, the next tight end man up was Jack Samarco, not Noah Bram. So where was he? Was he dealing with injuries this past season? Really didn't hear much from him. Or does he try and switch positions? Played high school, linebacker in high school, good size. At that position group, if tight end isn't necessarily working out, I think Noah Bram being a legacy of one of the best offensive linemen in West Virginia history, he's not going anywhere. Rich Rodriguez isn't going to be cutting Noah Bram, no matter whether he can make it or not. So can he play somewhere else if tight end isn't necessarily the position? Otherwise, this Jacuzzi, Bescuzzi, whatever his name is. Let me bring it up right here. I'm just blank. Johnny Pascuzzi, yes, from Iowa. Could be the leader in the clubhouse. Also, Jacob Barrick, a senior coming over from Jacksonville State. Watched some of the highlights of Jacob Barrick's blocking at Jacksonville State, and he's awesome. West Virginia fans are really going to like him in a Mountaineer uniform. Every single time Jacksonville State's running back was scoring from within the red zone, it was Jacob Barrick leading the lead-through block for him to score. So I think we're really going to like him. On the offensive line, this is where it gets dicey. And these guys are really going to have to gel and gel quickly because West Virginia is replacing its entire starting offensive line. It sucks, but you knew that was already going to be happening with, I think, 4 starters going to be moving on either to the NFL draft or graduating after this season. So you were going to get Tomas Remak, but nope, Nope. So he's off to Virginia Tech to go play with Matt Moore on a team that's going to barely finish bowl eligible, and that's going to be his college career. So instead, I think, and the other thing is, I don't see Will Reed on the online roster. One of the big, offensive line additions from Princeton. That West Virginia was hoping to get for right tackle. So with that being said, I think that gives the edge for Xavier Bosley, a guy who couldn't beat out Nick Malone last season, had over 800 snaps for Rich Rodriguez's Jacksonville State team in 2023. Couldn't beat out Nick Malone, so is this finally his time? Is this his opportunity at right tackle? And Tykeist Crawford, a transfer from Arkansas, big dude in his last year of eligibility. I think throw him in at left tackle. At guards, I like Walter Young-Bear. I think he'll be the leader in the clubhouse at left guard, and I think Nick Cray will battle LSU transfer Kimo Makanole, but don't count out Gavin Crawford, who was I feel like one of the unsung recruits from this high school recruiting class. Had some big schools that he was also considering, but wanted to follow his teammate Aiden Buchanan from Our Lady of Good Counsel out of Baltimore, Maryland. So he's coming in. Cray was a guy I feel like who was just knocking on the door to a starting position. So I would not feel apprehensive at all if he won out there at left guard. Makanole from LSU flipped. Couldn't make it at the SEC level on the offensive line starting, so he flipped to try and add depth defensively. He's now coming back to the offensive line. So I think Cray has a leg up there, but we'll have to see how they gel. So if it's Crawford at left tackle, Cray, and then at center, it's going to be a battle between Landon Livingston and the number one player from the state of West Virginia in the 2024 high school recruiting class, Robbie Martin, who chose NC State and Tony Gibson over West Virginia coming out of high school. Now he's back. Teammates out of high school with Zaw Jackson, who's now an early enrollee for the Mountaineers on the defensive side of the ball. Can he beat out Landon Livingston, who fared well in his few opportunities that he had this past season whenever there were some snap issues with Brandon Yates at center? So, like I said, if we're going down the roster, Crawford, Cray, Livingston, or Martin, and then Young Bear, I love that. And then Xavier Bosley at right tackle. Okay, all right. I'll see that going into spring, summer camp with whomever at quarterback, and then figure out like what this rushing attack will be, and we'll see at the wide receiver room, especially once Weimer gets added, or if West Virginia goes for another portal wide receiver. So let's flip onto the defensive side of the ball. And I want to talk about this defensive line because I listened to Zach Alley's press conference, who came on after Rich Rodriguez, and wow, liked what that young man had to say. We're about the same age, so I feel like I can say that. And what I feel like, oh, thank God, because I've been waiting for this for 20 years, is for West Virginia to be multiple on the defensive front. And that's my biggest question then, if I'm buying into this out of Alley, will West Virginia predominantly use a 4-man front or a 3-man front? Because I know he says, he's a 4-2-5 multiple defensive. So, when West Virginia lines up 1st and 10 at the, opposing 25, playing Texas Tech in clear weather, does that look differently than West Virginia 3rd and 2 inside their red zone playing Utah? Who's the personnel? What's the matchup types? What is he looking for? And what I think that will affect the most out of this defensive line and, I want front seven, if you want to call it that, how the bandits are used. Because in my opinion, is there much of a defense or a difference between a defensive end in a 4-2-5 set and a bandit in a 3-3-5 set? Or does it just come down to their play call responsibilities, that a bandit is solely a pass rusher and a defensive end has to be versatile and a run stuffer and be able to play kind of like the alleys or the gaps near the sidelines? That's what I'm really wondering. And West Virginia, I feel like on the defensive line, if they want to go heavy, you have Hammond Russell, Eddie Vesterinen with Asani Redwood, Corey McIntyre, and Nate Gabriel to play with. I'm okay with it, But again, if you're asking me to start two out of those guys, Vesterinen's had a lot of starting experience. Russell's had some snaps here and there. When West Virginia wants to use speed on the rush, looking predominantly at Jamori Robinson, now Braden Siders, and Marshawn Oxley, Keenan Eck, Adam Tomzik, and Obinna Onwuka. So they have bodies, they have players. They're going to rotate. They're going to try and figure this out here in this spring season, who can fit what they need. That is what's going to be so beautiful about this West Virginia defense this year, is that it's like a buffet. If you need a certain player to fit a certain position for what Zach Alley's going to want to do defensively, West Virginia has it. What I don't think that it has right now, at least, going into this spring practice, is a 3 technique. So if they're going to try and go to a 4-man front, your second defensive tackle might be a little smaller, might be a little slimmer. Can think back to Aaron Donald is definitely the perfect example of the perfect 3 technique. Hold on 1 second as I'm gonna put in my battery because my computer is starting to die. Actually, I'm going to just move it around and keep talking all at the same time. So, West Virginia, looking back at WVU's defensive line in 2007, Scooter Berry was 6'1", 290 pounds. Johnny Dingle was 6'3", 270 pounds. And Keelan Dykes was 6'5", 300 pounds. So, the past tells me with Jeff Castile on this staff, WVU is going to want to still be heavy up front. Why so many additions of guys who are, 240 to 260? I feel like West Virginia is going to have to go portaling once again if they're wanting to go heavier in 2025, or find that kind of perfect 3 technique that you can deploy that 4-man front. Unless you think that Jamori Robinson can do it. If he has that ability, looking at his size-speed combination and looking at some of the highlights that he's had from UTSA, I think he's a perfect linebacker. I really do. I think he would be a perfect rush end linebacker, bigger than what we experienced out of Bruce Irvin back in the early 2010s. So, I really think the perfect guy for that position on this defense is freshman Taylor Brown, but he's not going to start till the summer. And he's a true freshman. So if you're putting all the eggs in the basket of, if you want to have this perfect 3 technique player on the defensive line, or, we haven't yet to see what Corey McIntyre can do. Injured for all of the 2024 season because he allegedly tore his ACL in spring practice this past season. So about a year ago. So if he comes back fully healthy and can show it, maybe you have that opportunity. So will the defensive line go lighter? Will it go heavier? Are we going to see more 4-man fronts, and who are those 4 across? Or is it going to be a 3-3-5 as we've known it for the past couple of years under Neil Brown and Jordan Leslie? And we're talking about, we really have to make a decision between 3 linebackers. So at the linebackers, I think you have 2 tackling machines who can also cover the pass in today's RPO game in Reed Carrico and Chase Wilson. I think Carrico was a guy who, if Neil Brown would have given up on Trey Lathan a little bit earlier, Carrico was a guy who could have taken those snaps. But also, he was kind of at the same kind of position that Josiah Trotter was, and you weren't going to play Carrico over Trotter. So I think this is his time. This is his opportunity, and I think right next to Chase Wilson, another tackling machine, they're going to thrive. I really like the potential for both of those guys. And then right behind them, 2 guys who can take quality snaps, spell them, get their rest when they need to, in Ben Cutter, who's coming into his 3rd season, and Ashton Woods, who did play through some injuries and is just a redshirt freshman, but high-quality, athletic guy. Seen his high school tape on Huddle. So I think they'll give you some quality snaps. If you get, and again, you have so many bodies to try at that, 3rd linebacker outside kind of end guy, Robinson, Siders, Oxley, Eck, Tomzik, Onwuka. If there are guys who aren't just pure pass rushing specialists that can move over and play in the middle, then that's okay if you're talking about a third linebacker down. But again, I really like what I think we're going to see out of Carrico and Wilson in the middle. Now, this is where it gets wild. This is where it gets interesting. The defensive backs, I don't know what to expect. West Virginia went whole hog on recruiting the defensive backfield this winter. And they went after it. Number one, most notably, who I think will be West Virginia's CB1 this fall, Michael Coates from Nevada. West Virginia fought some other, power programs to get him in Morgantown. Probably spent the NIL money. Really like what I saw out of that guy. And if West Virginia decides to move Kokora Tarnu back to cornerback, where he was so successful at Jacksonville State 2 seasons ago, moved to safety this past season, and came on in the back half of the season once he kind of figured out Power 4 football, understood the scheme. Now, if he goes back to corner, Coates on one side, Tarnu on the other side, let's see it. And then the other two that I feel like we're going to be talking about, Fred Perry, who played a lot of snaps, leading tackler for Jacksonville State this past year, and then Jordan Walker, who also is coming out of the G6 level, out of FCS level, UT Chattanooga. So you have some guys. This is where I'm like, okay, I really liked what I saw out of Zay Jennings in the spring game a year ago. Jacob Boyce, the coaching staff, was really high on. Then he got out there against Oklahoma State and gave up a touchdown on his first play out on the field. And I said, oh boy, get back to the practice field, guy. Aiden Tagaloa Nelson is still playing on the basketball team. He doesn't play, so what is the point of him now going into his third year? Jason Cross was only 163 pounds. Neil Brown said before he was fired, said Cross had to get in the weight room. They do have two early enrollees in Sammy Etienne and Chris Filippo. At safety, don't get Julian Horton, who was their signing day addition over North Carolina until this summer. So you got 5 guys. You got 5 guys at that safety position, and then at corners, you have 6 seniors. Guys who are in their last year of eligibility: Jordan Scruggs, Derek Carter, Devontae Golden Nelson, Jason Chambers, Jacoby Spells, who is a holdover from the previous staff, and Michael Coates. So that's 6 corners and 5 safeties who are all of their final year of eligibility. That is who is going to get the predominant amount of starting time, because West Virginia has committed the NIL dollars to these players. So I'm looking at, Aiden Tagaloa Nelson, Jacob Boyce, Zay Jennings, Jason Cross, the 3 freshmen, then Jordan Jackson, who hasn't really played much other than I think a little bit of special teams here and there, Keyshawn Robinson, Chris Henry, Keon Washington. And then the only early enrollee out of cornerbacks is Zod Jackson. Dwayne Galloway, Tyrell Russell, and Chamarius Bomar don't start until the summer. So how many of those young guys is West Virginia going to keep? I think this is really a top-heavy, both safeties and corners, but you have to get it right. You can't have the kind of defensive secondary that West Virginia had this past year. Otherwise, you're going to have more games that you're going to watch the tape and just make you want to throw up from. So having so many seniors, they're going to get the playing time. Are there any of these guys out of this young, these young groups at safety and corners that you want to keep? That is for this coaching staff to determine. That's where I think we could see a lot of guys hitting the portal come after this spring practice, is at that corner and safety positions. But will you be yet to see? But I really like Zay Jennings. I think first and foremost, got to keep him. I really hope he shows out this spring. It's a guy who I'm definitely going to be rooting for. So then on special teams, I am shaking my head. I'm very comfortable and totally understand Ollie Straw. It's going to be his legacy year, his senior year. Awesome at punter. West Virginia recruited Ethan Head from Tulane, but I keep reading that he's just a kickoff specialist. So is he not going to do the place kicking? If so, who the heck is going to replace Michael, what's the kicker from 2024? Sorry. Michael Hayes. Who is replacing Michael Hayes at kicker? we see how many games come down to field goals. I do not want to have to stress Virginia with its field goal kicking. That was something that I really, really appreciated about Michael Hayes during his time at Morgantown. I think he only missed 2 or 3 field goals during his entire 2 years that he was accurate. Couldn't kick much outside of 45 yards, but anything 45 and in, he was nailing. So is he going to actually just be doing kickoffs, or is he going to kick field goals too? Maybe we'll find that out at the Gold Blue Showcase, or will West Virginia go portaling? Also, there are 2 walk-ons on the roster from last year with all-conference long snapper Austin Brinkman, now graduated. Might get drafted on day 3 of this NFL draft, or be one of those high-priority free agents, because you always need a long snapper in the pros, and he was one of the best in college football for multiple seasons. So I feel like you're going to have to keep one, or otherwise, can one of these offensive linemen that West Virginia already has on the roster, can they do some long snapping? I don't know. I don't know if that's part of their repertoire, or is West Virginia really going to dedicate one of these very coveted 105 roster spots to one of these 2 long snappers? I feel like you have to. And then at returners, this is the time. This is the time for Jaheim White, and this is the time for Rodney Gallagher. If you're going to have 2 back there returning kickoffs, those are my 2 guys. At punt return, if you're going to try and save Gallagher you're going to save White for running back, Rodney Gallagher, this is your moment. Preston Fox no longer with the program, graduated, so this is your moment. If you couldn't beat him out, now is the time you got to do it. So that's looking up and down the roster, quarterback, all the way from quarterback all the way down to your special teamers, and what I'm looking for this spring season. Love to know your thoughts. Again, I think this is going to be a military grade-like 5 weeks where these guys are going to be put through the grinder. They're going to have to show they can tackle. They're going to have to show they can run. They're going to have to show that they can play with team speed. That is what, it was a dirty word, I feel like, by Neil Brown, but Rich Rodriguez is saying it every other word. So everybody needs to get faster. And I think Dave Wanstead would attest to that speed kills. So love to know your thoughts. How you feeling about this offense? How you feeling about this defense? What are you looking for spring camp? What do you want to hear from it? Do you want to weigh in on Markey-All versus Henderson? Love to know your thoughts. If you like this video, please like it so more Mountaineer fans can see it across YouTube. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your dog that I do this each and every week, and I have a lot of fun doing it, and I'll be back. I am in the process of moving. You might have seen when I was moving around some boxes, I am in the process of moving, so you will be seeing a new background. You will be seeing like a new location for my videos moving forward after this next week. Gonna have a lot to talk with you about the baseball team that's currently undefeated, the basketball team that's trying to make the NCAA tournament, and then if there's any news pertaining to this football team as we get into spring practice, I'm going to bring it to you. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Go West Virginia. Let's go and spot the ball.